There have been notorious sightings of lights in the sky. The Rockefeller Estates are there next to Sleepy Hollow, legendary Sleepy Hollow. So that's not, so tell us a little bit about what you discovered as far as the Berkowitz and Son of Sam shooting, and what cult is operating in that context.
Well, this takes us, down the rabbit hole a few steps. The Son of Sam shootings were happening when I was living in New York, in Brooklyn at the time, and we all knew, the people, the sort of circle of our friends and colleagues, that we knew that there was more than one person in the Son of Sam cult. I mean, the rumors spread like wildfire. People were talking about it constantly. It was something that you felt all the time. And Maury Terry writes about a connection to the Son of Sam cult through a film producer called Roy Radin. Roy Radin at one point approached friends of mine and myself. He wanted to film rituals. He wanted to film, actual rituals taking place. He wanted to film something spooky, something, like conjuring a demon to visible appearance or something. So we stayed away from him because he looked a little strange, and he seemed a little bit unhealthy, in his interests. But the Son of Sam thing was going on at the time, and there was this. Maury Terry brings out this connection to something called the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Well, the Process is kind of an offshoot of Scientology, or members of Scientology created the Process Church, and we saw them around town all the time as well. And we didn't know if there was any actual connection to Son of Sam until much later. But what I find that is fascinating to me, and I just discovered this a few years ago, was that the man who came up with the name, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, and the man who incorporated the Process Church was Tommy Jude Baumler. And Tommy Baumler worked as a lawyer and an investigator out of Guy Bannister's office initially. He was a person who was deeply involved with David Ferrie, with Jack Martin, with all those characters from the New Orleans end of the Kennedy assassination conspiracy. And he's the guy who actually incorporated the Process Church. He came up with the name. The connections are very bizarre and very, very astonishing. We knew the Process Church. We knew them. They were spending a lot of time trying to look sinister and mysterious. And they did the thing with the German shepherds was their totem. They dressed in black. They worshiped both the devil and Jesus and Jehovah. It was quite a heady mixture. But in the years since then, members of the Process at that time have come out and acknowledged that Berkowitz was part of this, that they were part of this cult that was going around killing people, basically. That what Berkowitz said was true. Berkowitz is still in jail. He's never getting out. He knows that. But he has actually come clean on the murders that he did commit and the ones he did not commit. He has no reason to lie about it at this point. He's never getting out of jail. He's an admitted murderer, multiple murderer. But we knew that there were killings that were sort of off from the other killings. We knew there had to be more than one person doing it. And as it turned out, I think we've been proven right. The Son of Sam killings were part of a cult. New York was full of this kind of activity at that time. It was replete. We had the witchcraft phenomenon had just started. So you had the Gardnerian witchcraft, you had Ray Buckland, you had Leo Martello, you had all kinds of people who were pretty famous in this particular field, promoting witchcraft as a religion, promoting it heavily on the media. And that was just the surface. Then you had the Church of Satan crowd, and then you had the Temple of Set people. You had a lot of groups that were very, very active in New York City and New Jersey who were involved in this esoteric stuff. So this was something that was going on. We all knew it. We all knew who was in it. We all knew who to stay away from, or who you'd want to talk to, who was interesting and who wasn't. This was all part of the atmosphere.
Yo, back in this bit for another episode of Go Deep. Episode 231. I think this is episode 230. This is episode 231. You saw the title, I think. You saw the fucking intro because I put it out yesterday. Now you get to see the podcast, and of course, all I'm doing is just stalling like I always do, because this is Go Deep episode 231, and I had to make sure. So I was stalling while I go on my computer and find the number. But check this out, yo. It's going to be a good podcast because, of course, we're talking some real shit. Of course, we're talking some deep shit. Of course, we aren't. Never mind. I'm not gonna say that. But yo, let's get into some music first. Of course, you know this is how it rolls. You listen to some music and then you come back and we talk. Then I put some white people to, finish my message. Go Deep, episode 231. Your mother is so fun. And I might have given her another son. Go Deep, you bitch.
Oh shit! Brand new by Killer Cam.
Did you confirm and solidify the attempt
You must not know about me. It's drama season,
Little boys do
niggas.
a grown man's job. You dig? Hopefully you ready for the consequences and repercussions that your mouth got the rush of your body into. No homo. Well, United States is the playground, New York is base, but this ain't tag. We ain't safe on base, nigga. Let's play. Camel clutch 'em, iron sheep. Farnsworth jigger, lion geek, trying to creep. All while giant sleep. Wasn't concerned with it, but British was burnt a bit. Said that he learned the shit, heard Jigger confirm the hit. Looked me in my eye and said you paralyzed permanent. Holmes no hot comb, but his head will put a permanent. Who talking? Sweet cake, sneaks lace, be safe. My niggas fluent from 3 states. Cheapskates and Elite 8. High street beef taste. Your papes right, face slice. We ate, cause we'll break the shotties on you. Beware the hottie karma on ya. I warned you, no nets, invest in body armor. Adept to the apes, should've kept it a case. Now you get left in a lake of either your neck in a brace. When I step into place, yep, I'm wrecking the race. Wesson, got a question, made a vest for your face. You act old, you are old, you asshole, shucky ducky, I'm Chucky, child's play. Black roll, hot keys of butter, rubber, guns you see. The traffic, red light, green light, 1, 2, 3. What you done to me? You say they pull guns on me, I laugh, that was fun to me. This year I faced the 1 to 3, the 6 building, 4 main, they placed the bull. To the left, man, you acting irreplaceable. You must not know about me, you must not know about me. To the left, you must not know about me, you must not know about me. To the death, I'ma move and smack him. Give Rudy, clap him, the dude is acting. I pulled a Luger first, let Ruger ask.
What? Is this nigga stupid or dumb? Which one? Is this nigga stupid or dumb?
Sound skin, stupid ass. I get stupid cash. Movie platinum soundtrack at 3. You do the math. At 80%, let's smile. I just robbed Drew for a couple mil. Stupid at your desk job. My car, my office. Chick, my intern. Security and armrest. Yes, you get skin burn. Janitor got keys, please. Don't even wanna run. The stoop, the lobby, bodega, the conference room. Put in work with the Glock. I've been working a lot. Jewels is human crack shit. I got work on your block, and they smoke it up. Your labels like my coat. Shook it, cook it, rocked it, broke it up. Sorta like an open Dutch. Yak, clack, toe, and clutch. You the only one eating, the rest of them is broken.
Drama King.
Nas, I take your boobie home, make a movie. Treat her like a beach ball, you know. Play Salucci, only the cake can move me. What you want, K or Uzi? Don't smack 'em, Jim. I'ma take it scoopy. You know, rip it off quick, they get clipped and tossed. Sign a hoe, what you want, dog? Is Bishop Boss. Real then by Harlem girl, you got a girl. Treat 'em like my diamond globe, rock and swirl. While we styling coops, hyphy, wild and loose. Call BCW, it's child abuse. I'ma move and smack 'em, give Rudy, clap 'em, the dude is acting. I pulled a Luger first, let Ruger ask.
What? Is this nigga stupid or dumb? Which one? Is this nigga stupid or dumb? Which one?
You must not know about me, you must not know about me. To the left, to the left. You must not know about me. You must not know about me. To the death, to the death.
Brand new by Killer Cam.
Excuse me, do you take an Afro-American card? What's that?
All right. Yo. We are back in this bitch. So we're about to talk about this podcast. This is a good podcast because if you heard the intro, I put out the intro yesterday. It kind of is telling maybe about some human experimentation, maybe about some Hollywood shit, maybe about some MK Ultra type shit. What are we gonna talk about? So, go deep. So the other day I watched this this shit on Netflix about the Son of Sam murders, and I don't know, it was like some documentary. It was pretty cool, but I remember thinking, like, in the first 10 minutes, it's like some CIA shit. I remember saying that in my head. Hold on, let me silence this shit. Yeah, I remember saying, that's like some CIA type shit. I'm watching this shit, and then there's all these, like, I don't know, just when you watch it behind the scenes, you see like a bunch of people getting killed, and then you see, the whole New York reacting and all over the news, all the people kind of panicking and shit like that. That's like, usually when you see that is a secret agency controlling the culture of the city, or not the culture, the atmosphere, the whole society. That's how they do it. It's something like, remember there was this movie, Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Matthew McConaughey, and it had the I can't remember the exact story, but it was so long ago when I saw it, but it had, like, the bad guys looked like they were fucking politicians and shit, right? And they were telling him to do more and more and more dirt. And there was this one scene when this girl ran up to him, and he opened up his shirt, and he had all these devilish type markings on his chest and all this shit like that. And at the time as a kid, I didn't know why the fuck would a politician be telling a Leatherface to be killing more people. But when you grow up, you see that's how they change society. Someone goes in, does a bunch of murders, gets all over the news. It gets the people to panic, for one, but for two, for one, it distracts everybody. It could be some huge deal like the one going down in Israel right now, the situation going down in Israel. It could be a huge thing to, take away people's attention from this subject and put it on this subject. That could be one. It could be another thing, just an experiment to test and see how the population reacts, to find data on the population. That could be another part. It probably multiple things like that. But like, that's what the CIA does. That's their job, or one of them. But when you look at America, it's been like this ongoing inside battle between governments for as long as I've been living, and a long time before that. It's like a regular government and a hidden government. So a regular government, say Trump or whoever, Trump stirred up the population. He got a ridiculous number of Americans, up to 80 million, to support him. But all these other movements at the time were blown up into his his presidency, where prevented him from even running the country. But when that prevents him from running the country, that prevents America from running also. But these little small things will be like police shootings or, riots, street riots, shit like that. That's pushed on the president of whatever country. It could be America, it could be a lot of other countries, but the revolution is pushed on him. So the revolution also, as JFK says, these people are in every sector of society: media, military, arts, education, everything. They're in every sector of society. And they play like they're regular people. And they use massive ways of communication techniques to trick you into believing the world is one way when the world is a complete different way. That's their job. That's what they do. Like, cancel culture was thrown on Zack Snyder, and it came from everywhere. But cancel culture is thrown on cancel American culture, and it came from everywhere. Because when they took out Trump, as you see in the Time magazine article that I put up there, the Time magazine article says there was a secret campaign to basically take out Trump, which is an American president. So if there was a secret campaign to do that, if you know history, there's been secret campaigns to do that to other American presidents before, including JFK. Ronald Reagan got shot, and he didn't want to go for a second term or something like that, and allowed George Bush Sr. to be president. George Bush Sr. was leader of the CIA at the time. And then they have news outlets that they could change your whole opinion on something by telling you some bullshit, and you watch it and you believe it, because this is intelligence we're talking about. Intelligence is just information. If they tell you information and you trust them, even if it's a lie, you're going to believe it. Now, you might go deep and be like, what does this have to do with Son of Sam and all of this shit? But there are people who knows how to work this, knows social engineering is in everything. And this is pretty much what we're talking about. This is cancel culture that went at Zach, socially engineering that he was a alt-right, misogynist, blah, blah, blah. They said everything about Zach, and everybody said it. Blue checks, everybody. They can do that when they turn on you, because they're in everything. Or so, like, we look at Son of Sam, as we were talking about. We can also look at Charles Manson. Charles Manson was, killing a lot of people in preparation for Helter Skelter, a black and white race riot, all kind of shit. But he was also trying to instigate a black and white race riot. He was also trying to instigate the drug culture, the hippie culture of the slouch and blah, 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 the free sex culture, and he murdered, people in Hollywood, and it caused a big stir. He got some people out of the way, but it also changed history. It changed society. We no longer looked at the hippies as the peace movement. They looked at the hippies as some evil. They could, don't do drugs, because you could be like Charles Manson. But Charles Manson was connected to Hollywood. Even Charles Manson he didn't do the killings. He had women do killings for him. Girls, 3 girls to be exact. Which kind of be like Charlie's Angels. They were Charlie's Angels. But there's so many connections to Hollywood because the same people that implement the change of culture and society through different ways, as in riots and murders and shit like that, they also implement it through Hollywood. Why? Because Hollywood controls our brain. As you've been seeing, if you're a watcher of Go Deep, Hollywood controls your brain. The news controls your brain, so we have to control Hollywood and we have to control mainstream media. So you see, after these people get caught, it starts to come out that they're connected to the CIA or some shit like that, and but we don't know what's going on at the time. We just later on, years later, find out it was probably the CIA doing it. And it's probably in everything. It's probably them doing it. And they could fight presidents. They can fight kings of countries. They could do everything. They dethrone them by controlling the narrative of what the people see and, influencing them that way. Or they can just scare the shit out of you by making a mass murder spree in your city. Control it that way. So many different ways, but they're all connected. The people in Hollywood, the people in the media, the people in the CIA, the people in these private military, they're all connected. As you probably saw, because Zack Snyder been showing us this shit at BVS and his other movies he put out. It's a weird world, more weird than what we know. So we see, like, I remember some shit. Remember the DC sniper? You remember, we see shit like that, and we really don't know what's going on, and then they blame it on one person, and then it's all over. But at the time, it was hysteria, but also changing society, socially engineering society. They collect data on society, on how they act. Like during the Son of Sam murders, women started bleaching their hair because they didn't want to be a brunette. That's data. They were scared. So they did X, Y, and Z. That's data. Brain data, actually, which is MK Ultra test, which is what MK Ultra been doing at the end of World War II. And we've seen in the Snyderverse, the first Wonder Woman showed Germany was doing human tests with the gases at the end of World War I, and it just continued. These tests never stopped. These experiments never stopped. They're still going on today. Just, they're in America or they're in another country, they're just named something else. But all of these shit be experiments. Every news article we see, or every shit, like, they can create Black Lives Matters to have a whole summer of riots and slow down the whole fucking country just with putting news articles on TV. A black guy got shot. Make that news article big. Blow it up. A black guy got shot every day, every minute almost. But whatever one they want to choose, so they can switch the narrative, which then they go to the TV, they go to mainstream media, and they make all your Hollywood stars be like, we gotta say, we gotta support Black Lives Matter. Then all your Hollywood stars make you do it. And then you go out and support Black Lives Matter through these stupid ass riots that burn down cities and blah, 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 blah. And y'all have other rioters like Antifa and blah, blah, blah. But they all get their information through the TV. They all get their information through these mainstream sources who were controlled by 5 families. 5 families who go back to a bringing over of Nazis to America, dropping them in California and telling them to go learn about space. Not only learn about space, learn about the human brain and how it works in space. Learn about the human brain as much as you want. So much that I'm going to allow you to do experimentations on this country. Not I'm going to allow you to do it. The data is so valuable that you can do it. It's going to be called research. It's going to be at the Stanford Research Institute and other institutes like that. And we're going to learn the human brain so good that when we advertise, we're going to learn the human brain so good that we know everything it's going to do, everything it wants at every second of the day, what it wants to watch on TV, what it wants to stream on the computer, what it wants to eat, if it's going to kill somebody, if it's going to take drugs, if it's going to riot, if it's going to do anything. We have full spectrum dominance over the control of your brain through the media, and we've been doing it with tests since World War I. And we are still doing it because we have these groups in America like NXIVM, Scientology, all these other groups like that who think they are fucking reincarnate Nazis from those world wars, that they happen to be in America and Warner Brothers and Hollywood continuing these same tests today. And what I'm talking about is because we, as the Snyder Cut movement and people listening to that, have now become the biggest internet data contributors to the world, to the planet. Were we triggered? Of course we were triggered. Were we triggered into action? Of course we were triggered into action. Do the same people that know this same shit since the world wars, who've been collecting data on us, knew what we're going to do when we got triggered into action? Of course they knew what we were going to do when we got triggered. Are they cool people? Maybe, maybe not. Did Zack Snyder maybe tell on them boys a little bit with a few secrets? Probably. Has Zack Snyder been putting this technology in this movie? Yes. Has Zack Snyder been putting the behind the scenes issues that goes on with these different technologies and influence and media? Yes, he has. Has Zack Snyder used the biggest IPs of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman inside the retelling of all of this information that I've been saying? Yes, he has. Could that be why they don't like Zack Snyder? Could that be why they never really say shit to him? But how big is Zack Snyder? Think about this shit. Think about this shit. Zack Snyder controls the biggest movement online. Just something to think about. But no, don't think about it because I said it. Don't think about it because I said it. Let me put some white person in this bitch. Let me put some white person in this bitch, and we go talk about more about how society has been controlled, probably forever. How the Nazis have been out in front of society controlling since the world wars, because they've been doing tests on our brains. They are continuing to still do tests on our brains. Just right now, it's hidden inside of mainstream media, inside of Hollywood. But all the same people that's inside of Hollywood and mainstream media are the descendants of these Nazis that came over doing tests on the Jews. They're still doing tests. Yeah, bitch!
Just want to know firstly how you came to be on this journey communicating this message.
Well, it began for me with Watergate. It began with the Watergate investigations into President Nixon and his use of intelligence agencies to spy on the American people and other things that he was involved with. So I began to see some of the same names turning up in the Watergate investigation that had been involved in things like the Kennedy assassination or the Bay of Pigs invasion or a number of other political events in American history. Some of the same people kept cropping up. So I asked myself, well, what do all these people have in common? What is their common origin? I began to notice the involvement of various religious groups and quasi-religious groups or secret societies in some cases involved peripherally in this. One of the major players in Watergate was a man called E. Howard Hunt. And Howard Hunt was a former CIA officer who was also the author of a lot of novels, some of which were occult novels. And Howard Hunt lived on a place called Witch's Island. And he wrote about cults and secret societies. And I began to wonder why, what's his relationship? His relationship to Gordon Liddy, for instance. Gordon Liddy was an FBI agent, whereas Hunt was CIA. But Gordon Liddy, one of his claims to fame was that he spied on Timothy Leary, the famous man who brought us LSD, turn on, tune in, and drop out. So all of this started to create this kind of nuclear fission in my mind, and I was trying to figure out relationships, connections, what did all of this mean? And it led me eventually to the occult, but it also led me to, it led me to a study of the Nazi Party also. As a chapter in a book I was going to write, I wanted to show how the Nazi Party was not really a political party the way we understand it, but that it was a cult. And I wound up at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And an archivist there, Dr. Robert Wolf, who ran that operation, introduced me to a whole cache of weapons, a whole cache of documents that were basically weapons, SS documentation concerning an organization I had never heard of before, called the Ahnenerbe. And this group, run by Himmler as part of Himmler's personal staff, was engaged in occult research. Now, I had heard rumors like this. I had read Morning of the Magicians, like everyone else. I had read The Spear of Destiny. But none of these books were documented very well. There were no source material. It was a lot of speculation. But here I was in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., looking at microfilm records of the Nazis' own documentation concerning their occult research. And that stunned me. It stunned me that it existed, and it stunned me that no one else had decided to look at this material or had talked about it. So based on that, I started to write what became Unholy Alliance, which was a study of the Nazi Party's involvement with the occult since the origins of the Nazi Party back in 1918 and 1919. So I was, again, astonished to find out there is a great deal of documentation about this, but that mainstream historians have simply not covered it. They've left it to fringe or alternative historians. And in a way, it's a little unfair because we don't need to speculate about this anymore. The documentation is extensive. So that led me to think, well, if the Nazis were involved in this, if the Nazis had occult connections and occult beliefs and an occult ideology, what about the United States? What occult underpinnings might there be in the United States? What secret societies perhaps might be working or afoot in our country? I mean, after all, Germany was considered the most materialistic, most pragmatic, most developed, most sophisticated country in Europe. It gave us Goethe and Beethoven and Wagner and, Nietzsche and all of this. Great philosophers and great authors, great poets, great artists and musicians. If it could happen there, why not in the United States, which was striving to be as materialistic and as scientific as Germany? Why wouldn't we have a similar situation in the United States? And of course, my research led me to discover exactly that. There was definitely a connection there. There was definitely a kind of ideological current that ran parallel to that of the Nazi Party. And that's how Sinister Forces was born.
To what extent would that tie into modern-day ufology?
Well, in a great way. As we'll learn in the presentation of Secret Space Science, my focus is on the origins of that program. And the UFO connection goes back really to the beginning. There was belief that the Foo Fighters of World War II, which were bizarre flying objects that Allied forces saw over Europe, that there was evidence of a secret Nazi weapon that they had been developing, a kind of flying saucer that they were inventing back in the 1930s and 1940s. The Nazis had made tremendous strides in developing new forms of aircraft. We know, of course, about the V-1 and V-2 bombs, but there were other types of aircraft that they had invented as well, the swept wing aircraft for jet aircraft, for instance, and a lot of other technology like that. So there was a possible connection to UFOs from that angle. But there's also another connection, and that goes back to the Maury Island affair of 1947, the Kenneth Arnold sightings of UFOs, which gave us the term flying saucer back in June of 1947. A connection directly from there to the Nazi paperclip scientists that were brought over at the end of World War II to the United States to jumpstart our own space program, which was essentially, most people forget, was a military program. The space program was not a civilian program to investigate space, outer space, not in its original incarnation. It did not become a civilian program until 1957. But in the 1940s, this was a military operation run by the Department of the Army. The Nazi scientists were working for the Pentagon. They were working for the military. In contradiction to orders passed by President Truman at the time that no Nazi scientists were to be brought to the United States, that no Nazi scientists were to be offered jobs. He forbade it, and the Pentagon ignored him. The military just ignored him and brought over not only dozens of Nazi scientists, and not hundreds, but thousands of Nazi scientists to the United States. And that's not even talking about the Gehlen organization, which basically was the CIA's Western European intelligence operation, which was formed of former Nazi intelligence officers. So we had tremendous influence in the development of our CIA, in the development of NASA, in the development of our scientific and industrial apparatus in the 1940s and 1950s. The influence was heavily coming from the Nazis, from Nazi scientists, Nazi intelligence agents, Nazi philosophers, Nazi medical officers. Suddenly our country had, in a sense, sold its soul to the devil in order for us to gain a certain measure of security against the Russians. At the time, was our biggest fear was that the Soviet Union would become a world power, military power. And we were so frightened of that that we decided we would use the Nazis, regardless of their background, regardless of what atrocities they had committed. We would use them in furtherance of our own ends. The ends justify the means. And I think that this is the point at which America was at the verge of becoming something better than it was, and decided that maybe we would make these deals, we would cut these deals for the sake of security, and endanger our spiritual survival while we were guaranteeing our physical survival. It was a very tough decision to be made in the Cold War, and those of us who grew up in the Cold War remember the fear that was being inculcated in us from as children. I was one of those people who had to duck under my school desk in air raid drills in case there was going to be an atomic bomb attack on the United States. We had to learn how to protect ourselves, and that was basically hiding under a desk. But we were told this was how we were going to survive. We were told that we were in imminent danger of being bombed by the Russians, and even by the Chinese, which was laughable then, and it's still laughable today. But anyway, we were taught that the Chinese would come from the West Coast, and the Russians would come from the East Coast, and we'd all be obliterated in some kind of thermonuclear war. So this is the kind of fear that we grew up with, and which legitimized the use of Nazi scientists, because the Nazis hated the communists as much as we did. That was the story we heard. And therefore the Nazis would help us against the Soviet Union. But if we just stop and think for a second, and I was there at the time when this happened, in 1957, when the Soviets launched Sputnik, the world's first satellite, people had to stop and wonder, how is it that the Soviets beat the United States in the space race at that point, when we had all the best and the brightest working for us? We had Wernher von Braun, we had Walter Dornberger, we had Hubertus Sturkhold, we had a whole list of Nazis that we'll discuss in the presentation that worked for our side, that were supposed to be the cream of the crop, the people who ran Peenemünde, who ran Nordhausen, who ran all of the Nazi rocket factories, working for us on our side. How come we weren't able to launch a Sputnik of our own? There is evidence that we were being sabotaged by the very people we brought over, and that the Nazi scientists that we had in the United States were communicating secretly with Nazi scientists in Eastern Europe and in Western Europe. We know for a fact that Wernher von Braun was sending classified documents to Nazi scientists back in Europe. We know this now. Declassified documents reveal it. We know that Wernher von Braun, as an example, was a devoted SS officer. I mean, this is something we were never told in the United States when Paperclip was running and when NASA was started and when everybody was so euphoric over the landing on the moon and Wernher von Braun taking all the credit for it. We never really knew the extent to which he was a committed, devoted Nazi. An SS officer since the 1930s. This was a man who was a committed believer. You could not belong to the SS as you would belong to the Rotary Club or something like that, you know. The SS was a different kind of organization, and you had to prove your loyalty all the time. And he was promoted constantly. At the end of the war, he had the rank of major in the SS. We were never told this when he was brought over to run NASA. We were never told about a man called Struckhold, who was the father of aviation medicine, who was moved to Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, a man who had conducted horrible experiments on human beings in the death camps. We brought over to run our aviation medicine operation. The list goes on and on. So at some point we decided that this was okay. The military thought that when rabbis objected, for instance, to the fact that so many Nazis were being brought over, documentation that's been declassified shows that the military was writing correspondence back and forth saying, well, they're Jewish. You know, they're emotional because of, you know, what they saw in the Holocaust and the death camps, so we shouldn't pay any attention to them. Obviously, their points of view are marred by personal feelings. I mean, this was the kind of reaction that was taking place every day. For President Nixon in 1947-48 to run against Helen Gahagan Douglas by using a whisper campaign that her husband was Jewish and getting traction for that, being able to destroy Helen Douglas as a candidate because of a rumor that her husband was Jewish. This is when the photographs of the death camps, the newsreels have been shown in every movie theater in the United States. This is astonishing that we could still get traction for anti-Semitism in the United States and that Nixon could run on a platform of anti-Semitism when he had fought in the war. You know, he had been in the Navy in World War II. But as we find out later, as we can discuss in more length other times, as I talk about in my books, Nixon, one of his first jobs after the war, when he was still in uniform, was going through captured Nazi documents in Washington, D.C. for a friend of his, Allen Dulles. And Allen Dulles, who later became head of the CIA, who was at that time running part of the OSS in Europe, Allen Dulles helped him raise money for Nixon to run in California as a politician, something Nixon had not thought of until Dulles suggested it to him, and raised the money from oil interests to have Nixon run against Douglas. We find out later that Dulles had a lot to hide when it came to his involvement with Nazis and with his some of the remarks he made concerning the Nazi Party, just like General Patton made a lot of remarks concerning the fact that he thought we had pointed our guns in the wrong direction when we fought the Nazis, when we should have been invading Russia instead. It was General Patton who put SS officers back in charge of camps of displaced persons. The same Jewish prisoners that were liberated by American forces now found themselves in camps being run by former SS guards who had run the camps before. I mean, all of this tone deafness when it comes to the Holocaust and the anti-Semitism was remarkable. And it was remarkable among Americans and among American military personnel who did not see the problem, who thought this was an exaggeration, that we shouldn't be led by these kinds of concepts. So all of this made me say, let me look further. Let me see who was involved, what was going on, what their beliefs were, what their ideologies were. We believe in the United States that we have a separation of church and state. Well, that's a legal separation. That's a legal term. It's not, it doesn't really work. Our political leaders have quite often been extremely religious, sometimes in bizarre ways. Ronald Reagan comes to mind as a person who believed in the literal apocalypse and the end of days. What a lot of people don't realize is that Ronald Reagan's religious denomination was called the Disciples of Christ. And that religious denomination, which was very end of days, very apocalyptic, was the same denomination to which Jim Jones belonged, the man who was responsible for the horrors of Jonestown in Guyana. They were co-religionists. These are people who believed in the same things. And the tremendous effect they've had on our political and cultural life is beyond comprehension right now. And that's just one instance. That's just one area. Because we believe there's a separation of church and state, we don't look that closely into our candidates' religious beliefs. We just want to know that they're not Muslim at this point. And this is part of our tone deafness when it comes to these issues. My belief is that we need to know sometimes what these people really do believe. If we have a political leader with his finger on the nuclear button who believes in the end of days and who believes that the second coming is imminent, if all we have to do is, build the third temple, for instance, in Jerusalem, and then Jesus will come back and save everyone, which is a belief that George W. Bush has. We need to know this because this is going to affect our relations with the rest of the world. It's going to affect American foreign policy. It's going to affect a lot of things, by putting people like this in power. So we need to know. In Germany, what happened in the 1930s and the 1940s was they had political leaders who were weird spiritually. They believed in occult powers. They believed in the purity of the race, which was not a genetic concept. It was a religious one. They believed that if you were spiritually pure, you were racially pure. These two things went hand in hand. In the blood was the spirit. In the blood was the power. That if you were an Aryan, pure-blooded Aryan, and if you slept with a person who was not Aryan, you became polluted. This is a very bizarre concept. It goes back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. It goes back to the Qumran sect, where there was the pure water, and you couldn't drink from the pure water until you yourself were pure. Otherwise, you would make all the water impure. This was the same concept the Nazis were using by saying, I'm pure. Our SS officers all are pure. They have to prove their racial purity, going back to the year 1750. But if one of them sleeps with a Jewish woman, then automatically he's rendered impure and he must be cast out from the SS, otherwise he'll pollute the rest of the SS. These concepts were very real to them. Why else would you have to prove your racial purity going back to 1750? Why else were the death camps kept running until the very end of the war when it made no economic or military sense to do so? These are motivations that are not scientific. They're not rational in our sense of the word. These are occult motivations. And this is something that's fascinated me since the 1970s.
I was just about to get onto the occult. Most people are absolutely unaware of its predominance and influence in society and on the political situation, in fact, the whole world as it is today. I was wondering if you could go into that for a bit more.
Well, the occult is, the very word means secret. And we know that today we deal in a world that's comprised of secrets. We don't know all the secrets. We are paranoid. We are fearful of the fact that we don't know what's really going on. We see crises taking place constantly, and we're looking for scapegoats. When we don't find them, we start to imagine wild conspiracies. The problem is that, maybe half the time those wild conspiracies are true, or they have a basis in reality. Occultism is allied with the belief that there are secrets, and that if you have secret knowledge, you have secret power. What is, for instance, the CIA but a kind of secret society? A book came out in the 1970s called The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, written by Marchetti and Marx, former CIA people. And it was a heavily redacted book. It was censored like crazy. But their thesis was that the CIA was essentially a cult, that intelligence itself was a cult. When I look at a secret society like the Freemasons, for instance, and I look at an intelligence operation like the Central Intelligence Agency or almost any intelligence agency, there are so many things they have in common. Number one, you have agents who have different names, right? They have false identities, as you do in many secret societies. You're given a separate name. You're given a separate communication system, secret handshakes, dead drops, safe houses. You're given places that are secret that no one else knows about. You believe as a secret agent that you have access to secrets in other countries, and these secrets give you power. This is the same as an occultist, the same as anyone working in the esoteric field, anyone working in a secret society. They believe they have tapped into forces of which average people are not aware. This is the same thing with an intelligence officer. The mentality is virtually the same. They know secrets, they have secret power, secret influence, secret identities. They are multilingual quite often, as many occultists are. They have to learn all sorts of languages. They have to become able to blend into the various parts of society. They don't advertise who they are. A secret agent is a spy, does not advertise that he's a spy, obviously. And neither do the best of the occultists advertise that they are occultists. They walk among the rest of us secretly. They keep their interests secret. They keep their practices secret. Secrecy is a cornerstone of occultism, as it is for the intelligence agencies. A famous aphorism in occultism is to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. Those are the four recommendations or requirements for an occultist. So those are the same four recommendations you might find written on the floor of the CIA headquarters in Langley. Because in the floor of CIA headquarters in Langley, the phrase is, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Well, that's the first step, to know. And then there's to will. Of course, we've, not just the CIA, but intelligence agencies around the world, have been involved in overthrowing governments, have been taking their information that they collected and used it proactively to cause change in their environment, the way a magician causes change in his environment by summoning demonic forces or angelic forces, spiritual forces. That's to know and to will. To dare, of course, well, that goes beyond, without question. And to keep silent, they all do. Everyone keeps silent. The magician keeps silent about what he's done. He has to. In the old days, you could get burned at the stake for talking about it. And of course, the secret agent also keeps silent about what they've done. The secrets are important, and the silence is just as important as what they've accomplished. So, when we investigate political conspiracy, we are really in the same area as occult conspiracy. We are in the same neighborhood. And so many occultists, if you look at history, were also intelligence agents. Look at the Golden Dawn, the British Golden Dawn, for instance, very famous occult secret society. MacGregor Mathers, who was one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, wrote books on military theory and tactics, some of which are still in print and still used. Aleister Crowley, famous heir of the Golden Dawn system, was himself proved to be a secret agent working for British intelligence during World War II. In fact, Ian Fleming and Dennis Wheatley were friends of Aleister Crowley. Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond novels, considered using Aleister Crowley's expertise in occultism to combat the Nazis by creating false horoscopes and trying to figure out what the Nazi astrologers were telling Nazi leadership, for instance. Using Aleister Crowley's connections among German secret societies to use them as networks of spies and safe houses. This idea of occultists as intelligence agents goes back for hundreds of years, perhaps thousands of years, but is still today. I mean, as late as World War II, we know of for sure, with people like Crowley and with Mathers, with one of the other leaders of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, a German secret society, who was thrown into the camps by the Gestapo for intelligence reasons. I mean, we have the examples that exist till today. We know that these two worlds overlap considerably because the mentality is quite the same. So once you start from that premise and you open your mind to that concept, you can start reading the newspapers in a different way. You can start building up your own database of individuals, people whose names keep coming up, operations that don't seem to make sense at first, and only make sense in retrospect and hindsight because it was really a secret operation. There were other forces at work. Once you start developing that kind of sensitivity, you'll be surprised at how different the world looks. And you don't have to be paranoid to do this. You just have to be alert, I think. There was a famous New York Times literary critic, Anatole Broyard, who once wrote that paranoids are the only ones who notice anything anymore. And that's one of my touchstones, one of my favorite sayings. You have to be a little paranoid, maybe, in order to notice what's really going on, to pay attention as part of being paranoid, I suppose.
Talk a little bit about which direction you go with the information you communicate. It's such a broad spectrum. Obviously, you're trying to bring something into public awareness because, like all of us, we really are about making people aware of what's really going on. What is the focus? What is the general direction you tend to go with when you try to bring people into this information, not only for the first time, but to sort of string it all together?
I think that it's important for people, in the first place, to become aware of this, not to buy into the news programs they've been watching for the last 30 or 40 years or so. We know that, for instance, television news has been co-opted to the point where it's just entertainment. Entertainment dollars drive news broadcasting. And right now in the United States, for instance, most of the news organs, from television to radio to magazines, print media, publishing companies, are owned by 5 companies. Only 5 companies own most of what we see in the United States in terms of media, in terms of news and other programming. That means that you could put 5 guys around a table at the Four Seasons or at the Jock of the 21 Club in New York, and they could sit there and pretty much dictate what Americans will learn, what they will see, what they will hear, what they will know. They're the ones who are going to control that to a large extent. I think that what we need to do is we need to be aware of that, first of all, that we cannot rely upon the news media to tell us everything. They're going to tell us little bits and pieces. They're going to keep us entertained. We're going to look at the news the way we're looking at a reality TV show, and that's the extent of our involvement. The world's become a very dangerous place. The world's become a very complicated place. We can't on our own as individuals hope to counteract all the effects of what's taking place behind the scenes because we have no idea what that is. We don't have the political power or the economic power. But as individuals, we can become aware of what's really going on. We can become aware of history. We can become aware of the currents that are running through, how we're being manipulated, how our fears are being manipulated to make us march in lockstep behind leaders who are using fear as a propaganda device to make sure that they have additional power, that they can extend their power over us. We have to, I think, liberate ourselves on a one-by-one basis. Each of us individually has to liberate our consciousness and do what we can to do that, to free ourselves of this stranglehold that media has on us, because we have been led down the garden path so many times. In Germany, in 1933, we had Hitler becoming Chancellor of Germany under impossible conditions. I mean, if you want to believe that Hitler came to power through regular political machinations, you'll have to look again, because in 1932, in December, he had no power. His party had lost so many seats in the German parliament, it wasn't funny. By January of 1933, he suddenly was Chancellor of Germany. And this was due to circumstances I talk about in Holy Alliance, but basically there was an occult operation designed to put him back in power. He got in power, and then there was the Reichstag fire. There was a fire of the German parliament building, and Hitler immediately blamed it on communists and told the German people to give him power over them, to give him complete power in Germany, to become the Führer, and then he would guarantee their safety. This is a technique that's been used again and again and again in countries around the world before and since. And it happened in the United States after 9/11. We had a president who said, give me all the power, give me the Patriot Act, give me Homeland Security, I'll make sure you're safe. But you're going to lose some liberties here and there. You're going to lose privacy, you're going to lose habeas corpus, you're going to lose a number of things. We're going to break a lot of laws. But we're doing this to keep you safe. As long as we believe in that premise, as long as we believe it's more important to be safe than to be right, as more important to be safe than it is to be free, we're going to get the kind of leadership we deserve. What we have to do is fight the fear. This is the first thing that we have to do. We have to fight the fear. We have to stop being afraid. I heard so many times since 9/11 that 9/11 changed the world. Nonsense. It didn't change the world. You know, all it changed was the United States became part of the world in 9/11. But the rest of the world's been living with terrorism for decades, for longer than decades, for centuries. It's been a commonplace. Ask anyone in Northern Ireland. Ask anyone in the Middle East, as an example. In Europe, anywhere in Europe, where there have been bombings in train stations and discotheques and everything else. By right-wing extremists, by the way, not necessarily by left-wing extremists. So you have a history of this that goes on forever. Nothing changed. Okay, what changed is the Americans should have had a wake-up call. And instead they did predictably what they would do. What I knew they would do is they would fear, and by being afraid, they would give their political leaders ultimate power to, quote unquote, protect them. And that's what's been going on now. We have to individually free ourselves. I mean, there's no way to do it otherwise, I don't think. If we form organizations to do it, there's going to be power politics, there's going to be leaders, they're going to be charismatic, and we're going to eventually sign over part of our souls to them. So I think it starts with us. If we're free individually, then no one can enslave us collectively. And I think that's what we have to do.
Hope you like the video. If this video helps you, please subscribe and like the video to mean a lot to me. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Take care.